Good evening. To be honest with you, I have been in this career for about 15 years now, and I have seen and heard a lot of terrible things. Nothing really comes close to what was discussed in court today, and I do want to be frank with you. What you're about to see and hear is gravely disturbing.
A childhood of chaos. Candace Diaz came into the world in an environment shaped by addiction and neglect. Her mother and grandmother both battled alcoholism and drug use, transforming what should have been a stable household into a revolving door of destructive behavior. The tension in that home manifested not just in occasional arguments, but in day-to-day neglect. Candace often lacked proper meals, supervision, and even basic hygiene. She would later describe these early years as foggy and overshadowed by constant disorder. When Candace was around 4 years old, a catastrophic event changed the course of her life forever. Late one evening, a fire erupted in the family home. Official reports suggest Candace's grandmother, heavily intoxicated, may have started the blaze accidentally, possibly by leaving a lit cigarette or failing to extinguish a cooking fire. Flames spread quickly, trapping Candace in a room with no clear exit. By the time first responders arrived, she had suffered severe burns across large portions of her body. The nature of these injuries was both physically and emotionally scarring. Doctors treated Candace for second and third-degree burns, administering skin grafts where necessary. Meanwhile, social workers launched an investigation into Candace's home conditions. As the child's mother and grandmother faced scrutiny for criminal neglect, Candace herself was left in limbo, her father absent and no reliable parental figure in sight. Ultimately, Candace's mother and grandmother were charged with criminal abuse for their roles in exposing her to such a dangerous situation. While some relatives felt this might bring a glimmer of hope, removing Candace from a destructive environment had also left her effectively orphaned. She was shuffled through foster placements until her maternal aunt Cynthia Diaz stepped forward, offering to care for Candace. The trauma of near death and serious injury, however, would echo through Candace's psyche for decades to come. Seeking refuge with Aunt Cynthia, Aunt Cynthia Diaz lived in a modest suburban home, worlds apart from the chaos Candace had known. Determined to provide stability, she took Candace in with the hope of offering her a second chance at childhood. Cynthia enrolled Candace in therapy, arranged follow-up medical appointments for her burns, and made sure she had clean clothes and regular meals. To Candace, these might have been simple acts of guardianship, but they were also a revelation. She had never experienced a home free from shouting and erratic behavior. Despite Cynthia's best efforts, the psychological aftermath of Candace's early trauma ran deep. The child developed recurrent nightmares about fire and showed an almost compulsive need to be reassured of her safety. Small triggers like the smell of smoke or certain loud noises could send Candace into a tailspin of anxiety. Therapists noted that while she was capable of forming attachments, Candace struggled to trust that caring adults wouldn't suddenly disappear or turn abusive. This fear would define many of her interpersonal relationships in the years to come. Candace's father offered no assistance. He neither provided child support nor displayed any consistent interest in her well-being. His absence became an emotional void that Candace tried, in various ways, to fill. Though Cynthia created a much improved environment, she couldn't entirely undo the damage already done. Candace's early experiences had instilled in her a pervasive sense that security was fleeting, and that people could vanish at a moment's notice. It was a mindset she carried into adolescence and beyond. Turmoil beneath the surface. By the time Candace entered her teenage years, she had adapted outwardly to Cynthia's household routines, attending school and participating in therapy, but her emotional scars remained raw. Beneath her relative calm, a potent mix of anger and loneliness simmered. Classmates sometimes described her as quiet or aloof, but behind that exterior, Candace was desperate for acceptance and validation. Counselors observed that Candace appeared particularly vulnerable to anyone offering her even superficial attention. She gravitated toward older peers or romantic interests who might, in her eyes, serve as protectors. Unfortunately, This yearning to be wanted often overshadowed better judgment. She paid little heed to red flags like aggression or manipulation in others. Many survivors of childhood abuse develop a skewed sense of normalcy, having grown up in environments riddled with violence or neglect. Candace was no exception. Aunt Cynthia remained a reliable anchor, doing her utmost to guide Candace toward better life choices. Yet, Cynthia could only supervise her needs for so many hours each day. As Candace reached 16 or 17, she began testing her newfound freedom, skipping curfew, neglecting her homework, or dating questionable partners. Cynthia, worried but not wanting to push Candace away, balanced discipline with empathy. She understood too well that the child before her had endured horrors that still shaped her reactions to stress and conflict. Meeting Kyle Barrett and a glimpse of hope. In her late teens, Candace became involved with Kyle Barrett, a young man who offered her the emotional attention she craved. Their relationship was short-lived but intensely romantic at first. Candace later recalled feeling that Kyle saw her in a way few had. He provided warmth, compliments, and the illusion of stability. Eager to escape the shadows of her past, Candace poured herself into this fledgling relationship. It wasn't long before Candace discovered she was pregnant. She and Kyle decided to keep the baby, envisioning a family life that might finally heal Candace's lingering wounds. In truth, both were still teenagers, grappling with limited finances and no real-life plan. Aunt Cynthia supported them as best she could, providing financial help and guidance about prenatal care. In Candace's eyes, having a child was a chance to be the mother she herself had never had, loving, protective, and ever-present. Gabrielle "Gabby" Renee Diaz was born, and for a few fleeting months, optimism filled the home. Candace appeared genuinely devoted to her newborn, while Kyle tried to balance new fatherhood with his own youthful inclinations. Unfortunately, reality soon intruded. Kyle's interest waned. He clashed with Candace over finances and responsibility. The relationship deteriorated just as swiftly as it had begun. When Gabby was around 3 months old, Kyle packed his belongings and left. The abandonment devastated Candace. Not only did she lose her partner, but she feared that her baby would now endure the same paternal absence she had known. Overwhelmed, she moved back in with Aunt Cynthia, who took pity on the frazzled new mother and her infant daughter. For a while, Gabby's laughter and curiosity lit up Cynthia's home, offering a sliver of hope that Candace might rise above her own tragic history. Aunt Cynthia steps in again. With Kyle gone, Aunt Cynthia once again became Candace's main pillar of support. She arranged pediatric visits for Gabby and ensured the child received immunizations, proper nutrition, and a stable daily routine. Gabby thrived under this structured care, hitting her milestones with bright-eyed enthusiasm. For Candace, these months provided a chance to observe positive parenting firsthand, something she had rarely seen in her own early years. Although Candace showed love toward Gabby, she remained guarded and riddled with insecurities. The wounds from her own abandonment and abuse hadn't healed. Cynthia tried to coax Candace into more therapy sessions, but Candace often resisted, insisting she would be fine on her own. Nonetheless, she watched as Aunt Cynthia clothed, fed, and protected Gabby without question. Those quiet, ordinary acts of nurture were exactly what Candace had lacked growing up. As time went on, Cynthia realized that legalities might become an issue. Candace, as Gabby's biological mother, still held full custody in the eyes of the law. Yet, practically speaking, Cynthia was functioning as the primary caregiver. Eventually, the tension between legal authority and actual caregiving set the stage for a pivotal decision. Enrolling Gabby in preschool or kindergarten would require Candace to reassert her status as parent. From Cynthia's vantage point, this formality was more a danger than a necessity. But the system's rules were unambiguous. Despite Cynthia's reservations, Gabby's legal guardianship remained with Candace. Once the child reached school age, Candace insisted on taking her back. Various factors played into this decision. Candace felt social pressure to prove she could be a competent mother. She wanted to avoid scrutiny by Child Protective Services, fearing they might remove Gabby entirely if they saw Cynthia as the de facto parent. On a personal level, Candace yearned to be recognized as a capable adult, not a helpless ward who always relied on her aunt. Gabby, just 3 or 4 years old, couldn't fathom the life-altering significance of leaving Cynthia's nurturing home. She accompanied her mother to a modest mobile home in Belleville, Michigan. The property was small, and even Candace acknowledged that the unit was rough around the edges. Still, she believed it was enough to begin a new chapter. Friends, however, worried that Candace was ill-prepared to live independently, let alone raise a young child. By all accounts, the initial weeks passed uneventfully. Candace managed to keep a semblance of order. Gabby, bright and curious, sometimes missed Cynthia, but adapted to the new routine. If Candace had found stable employment or steered clear of dysfunctional relationships, perhaps the story would have taken a different turn. Unfortunately, fate had another plan, manifesting in the form of Brad Fields. Brad Fields was older than Candace by several years and had a rap sheet featuring assault, illegal weapon possession, and rumored involvement in drug dealing. He projected an air of swagger and dominance that Candace found strangely reassuring at first. Brad framed himself as someone who could protect Candace, playing into her core vulnerability, the fear of being left alone and unshielded in a threatening world. Before long, Brad moved into the mobile home. Friends and acquaintances raised eyebrows, concerned that Candace was repeating her mother's pattern of latching onto unstable partners. But Candace disregarded these warnings. She enjoyed Brad's company. Initially, he occasionally brought groceries or fixed minor issues around the trailer, giving the appearance of a supportive boyfriend. Candace believed she had found the strong paternal figure she and Gabby both lacked. Yet, cracks in Brad's weight emerged quickly. He criticized Candace for small mistakes in housekeeping, snapping at her or belittling her intellect. He complained about Gabby's presence, implying the child was disruptive. Candace, accustomed to equating criticism with normal adult behavior, made excuses. He's just stressed, or he's had a hard life too. In truth, Candace was sliding into a classic cycle of emotional abuse, where the abuser methodically erodes the victim's self-esteem and cuts off external support systems. As the weeks turned into months, the mobile home in Belleville deteriorated at an alarming rate. Trash bags piled up in corners, unwashed dishes collected in the sink until mold grew. The refrigerator sometimes contained little more than leftovers, which quickly spoiled in the disorderly environment. Neighbors observed unusual comings and goings at odd hours, occasionally hearing loud arguments through the thin walls. Brad's temper flared often, and Candace, rather than protesting or seeking help, scrambled to appease him. The atmosphere shifted from tense to truly threatening. According to one neighbor's later account, it wasn't just an unkempt home, it was a place that felt intrinsically dangerous. Suffused with anger and neglect, Gabby, barely 4, lived in a perpetual state of uncertainty. She no longer had predictable bath times or bedtimes, nor the consistent meals she had grown used to at Aunt Cynthia's. Playtime outdoors was rare. If Brad heard Gabby making noise, he might unleash a torrent of verbal abuse. Candace's own traumatic past had conditioned her to see chaos as normal, or at least as something to endure rather than escape. In this toxic environment, Brad's maltreatment of Gabby escalated. At first, it manifested as harsh scoldings for trivial matters like dropping food or speaking too loudly. Soon, Brad's rages took a physical turn. He would grab Gabby by the arm, yank her into a corner, and threaten to lock her in her bedroom if she didn't shape up. Text messages between Candace and Brad, later uncovered by investigators, exposed an even more sinister side: references to punishing Gabby by withholding meals or making cruel jokes about humiliating her. Candace occasionally tried to soothe Gabby afterward, but in many instances, she either actively participated in punishments or turned a blind eye out of fear of angering Brad. This was no spur-of-the-moment situation. It was a systematic pattern of child abuse, woven into the daily fabric of life inside the trailer. Aunt Cynthia's name scarcely came up anymore in Candace's conversation with Brad. Where once Cynthia served as a lifeline, she was now painted as an interfering relative who wanted to take Gabby away. Brad encouraged Candace to sever contact, and Candace, desperate to keep her relationship intact, complied. In effect, Gabby lost her last accessible shield against continuous maltreatment. On the rare occasions when outside individuals caught glimpses of Gabby, red flags emerged. Neighbors heard the child crying late at night or noticed bruises on her arms. Some neighbors voiced concerns among themselves but hesitated to confront Brad directly, fearing his volatile temper. A teacher who evaluated Gabby for preschool found her timid yet well-mannered, which at first didn't scream abuse. Children often hide the truth out of fear or confusion, and Gabby, at 4, may have already learned that confiding in outsiders leads to worse consequences at home. Candace's co-workers, at the rare times she held a job, occasionally overheard snippets of tense phone calls. They observed that Candace looked perpetually exhausted or on edge. When asked, she offered vague explanations about financial stress or health issues. Child Protective Services, if contacted, apparently did not intervene effectively, perhaps due to unsubstantiated reports or an overburdened system. By the time clear evidence emerged, the situation was already careening toward tragedy. Observers often question how a parent, once a victim of severe neglect, can stand by while her child suffers. The answer is rooted in the vicious cycle of generational trauma. Candace grew up accepting that abuse, both emotional and physical, was part of life. She experienced a critical lack of nurturing during her formative years and repeatedly encountered adults who failed her. As a result, she lacked the internal blueprint of what healthy caregiving looks like. When Brad began terrorizing Gabby, Candace's survival instincts kicked in. Keep the abuser happy, avoid confrontation, and minimize any action that might trigger more violence or abandonment. While this context does not absolve Candace, it helps explain her mindset. Her personal fears and unhealed wounds paved a direct path to complicity. When Brad boasted about punishing Gabby, Candace often texted back with mundane replies, as if discussing chores rather than a helpless child's suffering. She was perpetuating a cycle she had once endured, only now Gabby was the casualty. The road to New Year's Day to 018, the final weeks of 2017, saw an escalation in Brad's cruelty. Friends who visited reported a suffocating tension in the mobile home. Arguments grew more explosive, and the living conditions more deplorable. Brad openly berated Candace and Gabby for any perceived shortcoming. Candace's phone messages revealed a daily onslaught of threats aimed at Gabby, combined with Candace's lukewarm attempts to calm Brad or distract him. Brad complained about Gabby wetting the bed, a typical childhood issue that can stem from stress or fear. Rather than seeking medical advice, he punished her severely. He forbade her from using the bathroom at night without explicit permission, ignoring that this likely increased nighttime accidents. Physical discipline became routine: a swift backhand, a harsh yank on her arm, or forced standing in one spot for hours. By December, it was clear to outsiders that something was seriously wrong in that trailer. Neighbors sometimes heard bangs or screams, but calls to authorities, if made, failed to prevent further harm. A combination of fear, bureaucratic delays, and Brad's manipulative tactics proved fatal. New Year's Eve tensions. On December 31, 2017, the tension in the mobile home reached a boiling point. Candace recalled that Brad had been drinking heavily, pacing the small living room while muttering complaints about money and the brat, his demeaning nickname for Gabby. The child, sensing trouble, kept to her room, probably too frightened to venture out. Despite the festive date, there was no celebration, only a growing sense that any minor misstep would ignite Brad's fury. Candace later mentioned hearing loud music and the sound of objects thrown against walls. She felt powerless to intervene, torn between her desire to protect Gabby and her terror of challenging Brad's authority. Text messages sent that evening to a distant friend left unanswered suggested Candace was aware of how dangerous Brad had become. "He's losing it," she typed in one message. I'm scared about what he might do. The morning of the tragedy, New Year's Day, 2018, dawn in Belleville cold and gray. Inside the mobile home, tension lingered like an unspoken threat. Brad, hungover and short-tempered, fixated on the idea that Gabby needed discipline for some small infraction, likely bedwetting, or waking him too early. Candace, exhausted, tried to mollify him, but he brushed her off. The child had yet again become a scapegoat for Brad's frustrations, and Candace was too entrenched in fear to intervene effectively. Brad marched to the bathroom, turning on the taps to fill the bathtub. Witnesses later described the home's water heater as dangerously high, which allowed scalding water to flow almost immediately. Candace lingered near the doorway, her stomach tight with dread. She would claim later that she mumbled objections, but she never actually stopped Brad. The next few minutes would seal Gabby's fate. Brad called Gabby into the bathroom, barking orders. The child, confused and terrified, entered the cramped space. Without warning, Brad pushed her into the steaming water. Gabby's shrieks pierced the walls, a sound that neighbors claimed to hear in muffled form but did not recognize as immediate danger. Meanwhile, Candace stood by, seemingly paralyzed. The water was so hot that Gabby's skin burned within seconds, leaving large patches red and blistered. Brad held her in place, spewing invectives about teaching her a lesson. Candace did not physically intervene. The child's screaming escalated to desperate pleas, then to choking sobs. Eventually, Brad dragged her out of the tub, the skin of her legs and torso peeling away. Gabby slipped, hitting her head on either the bathroom floor or the tub's edge. According to investigators, Candace and Brad allowed critical minutes to pass without calling 911 to worried about the consequences to place an immediate emergency call. Aunt Cynthia's desperate arrival. At some point, Candace called Aunt Cynthia in a panic, saying only, "Something's wrong with Gabby." Cynthia, alarmed by Candace's tone, rushed to the mobile home. She arrived to find chaos, Gabby unconscious and severely burned on the bathroom floor. The walls and floors caked in grime, and a nauseating odor that combined the stench of trash with scalded flesh. Cynthia knelt to administer CPR, tears streaming down her face, while Candace hovered nearby in a daze. Cynthia demanded Candace call 911. Precious time ticked away as Candace hesitated, apparently frantic about how this would look to authorities. By the time an ambulance arrived, Gabby was non-responsive. Paramedics noted that her burns were extensive and consistent with forced submersion in dangerously hot water. They worked feverishly to stabilize her but saw that her vital signs were weak. Gabby was rushed to St. Joseph Mercy Hospital, where doctors found second and third-degree burns covering a significant percentage of her body. She also showed signs of older injuries, including bruises in various stages of healing. Despite exhaustive efforts to resuscitate her, Gabby was pronounced dead that same day, New Year's Day, 2018. The initial investigation. While paramedics transported Gabby, law enforcement arrived at the trailer to question Candace and Brad. Their stories quickly contradicted each other. Brad insisted that Gabby liked to run her own baths and Candace claimed she had no idea. The water was so hot, yet both adults were dry. There was no sign they had tried to pull Gabby from the water in a frantic rescue. The bathroom floor was only partially wet, as though attempts to remove or cool the child had been minimal. Investigators found chunks of skin in the drain, suggesting Gabby had been held under scalding water for longer than a few seconds. As officers combed the property, the depth of neglect stunned them. The living room was strewn with fast food wrappers, dirty clothes, and rotting leftovers. Cigarette butts overflowed from makeshift ashtrays. The stench of animal waste permeated the entire trailer. In Gabby's small bedroom, a soiled mattress lay on the floor. With no evidence of recent cleaning or fresh bedding, the entire scene spoke of prolonged squalor and inattention. Neighbors began to share their suspicions, recalling late-night shouts and the occasional whimpering from a terrified child. One neighbor admitted hearing terrible screaming earlier that morning, then silence, but felt too intimidated by Brad's reputation to interfere. Police gathered enough probable cause to suspect that Gabby's death had been no accident. Autopsy revelations. At the hospital, medical examiners performed a swift but thorough autopsy on Gabby. They found severe burn trauma over much of her lower body, consistent with forced immersion in extremely hot water. Additional findings included bruises on her arms, legs, and torso, plus indications of possible fractures that had never been professionally treated. Toxicology reports revealed traces of amphetamines in Gabby's system substances no child should ever have ingested. The official cause of death combined burn shock, head injury, and probable sepsis. Given the older signs of abuse, the medical team concluded that Gabby had lived under ongoing maltreatment for some time, culminating in a brutal final assault. Their findings left little room for doubt. This was a homicide case, not a tragic mishap. Flight and a nationwide manhunt. As more evidence stacked against them, Candace and Brad seemingly panicked. Within hours of the autopsy results, they vanished from the mobile home. They took with them a small stash of clothes and personal items, but left behind another child, Zoe, who was quickly placed into protective custody. Neighbors spotted Candace and Brad hurriedly driving away, describing their exit as frantic. Law enforcement alerted local stations across Michigan, suspecting the pair might try to cross state lines. When calls to Candace's or Brad's phones went unanswered, the case was escalated to the U.S. Marshals, prompting a nationwide alert. Their faces appeared on digital billboards along highways, with warnings that they were armed and dangerous. Public outrage ignited, particularly on social media. Many demanded justice for Gabby, decrying the glaring failures of a system that allowed this child to slip through the cracks. Investigators soon uncovered incriminating text messages between Candace and Brad, references to fixing the brat, complaints about Gabby's bedwetting, and jokes about extreme punishments. One chilling exchange read, "Brad, if she doesn't stop whining, I'll drown her in my piss." Candace, "Don't say that. Just be quiet. We have neighbors." Brad, "So what? I do what I want." These and other messages confirmed a sustained pattern of cruelty. They also revealed Candace's complicity, as she rarely objected and often seemed more concerned about outside detection than her daughter's suffering. News outlets swiftly picked up the story of the mother and boyfriend who tortured a 4-year-old. Images of Gabby bright-eyed and smiling circulated online and on local TV, fueling public anger. Candlelight vigils cropped up outside the mobile home park. Strangers left teddy bears, flowers, and handwritten notes near Gabby's last address. Aunt Cynthia, distraught and blame-ridden, spoke briefly to reporters, stating she had done all she could to guide Candace and protect Gabby. "I tried to take care of her. I really did," she said. "I never wanted her back in that environment." Cynthia also voiced frustration at Child Protective Services, questioning how they had failed to intervene despite obvious red flags. Meanwhile, speculation ran rampant that Candace's own childhood trauma had led her down this dark path. Was it mental illness? Was it fear of abandonment? Critics, however, insisted that no past abuse could justify Candace's horrifying betrayal of her daughter. Regardless of the cause, the public demanded swift action to hold both Candace and Brad accountable. Narrow escapes and close calls. For nearly 2 weeks, tips streamed in about possible sightings of Candace and Brad. In Kentucky, a motel clerk insisted she recognized the couple from a news segment, but police arrived too late to catch them. In Tennessee, a gas station manager reported a suspicious pair fitting their description, only to find they had already driven off. Investigators pieced together a possible route. Phone tower data suggested Candace's phone pinged along back roads, possibly to evade major highways where digital billboards displayed their faces. Each near miss heightened public frustration. Radio talk shows asked how do people with no major resources could stay ahead of the law. The simplest explanation: they had just enough street smarts and desperation to remain mobile, paying in cash and avoiding places with cameras or ID checks. Capture in Georgia. On January 16, 2018, a vigilant truck driver at a rest stop in Lowndes County, Georgia, noticed a man and woman rummaging through an SUV with out-of-state plates. He approached them, inquiring if they needed help. The man grew defensive, and the woman appeared startled. Something about their demeanor raised the driver's suspicions. After returning to his rig, he quietly phoned the local sheriff's office, providing a description of the car and the individuals. Within minutes, two patrol cars arrived. Officers ran the plate number and confirmed it was flagged for the wanted suspects. They approached with caution, firearms at the ready. Brad tried to start the engine, but was blocked in. Candace, shaking, exited the passenger door, repeating, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry," though no one could tell if she meant remorse or fear. The couple was arrested without further incident. A later search of the vehicle revealed scattered clothing, leftover fast food, and a few personal items from Gabby's short life. Questioning and extradition. Detained in Georgia, Candace and Brad underwent initial questioning. Brad blamed Candace for everything, claiming she snapped on New Year's Day. Candace mostly sobbed, offering disjointed explanations about an accident. Neither story matched the damning text messages or forensic evidence from the mobile home. Knowing they faced murder charges in Michigan, they eventually accepted extradition. Transported north in a secured vehicle, Candace sat mostly silent. According to the accompanying officers, Brad alternated between bouts of agitated mumbling and sullen quiet. The pair arrived in Michigan to a media frenzy. Footage of them being led, handcuffed, into a courthouse became headline news. Reporters shouted questions about whether they felt remorse, but neither responded. The charges and preliminary hearings. Prosecutors swiftly announced first-degree murder and torture charges against both Candace and Brad. Additionally, they faced multiple counts of child abuse, reflecting both ongoing neglect and the horrific final act. At the arraignment, they were denied bail, deemed flight risks and dangers to the community. Aunt Cynthia and other extended family attended the hearings, visibly shaken. Candace, wearing jail-issued clothes, kept her eyes downcast. Brad appeared defiant, at times rolling his eyes when the judge spoke. The prosecution indicated they had a wealth of evidence, including forensic proof of forced immersion burns, phone records revealing their day-to-day cruelty, and witness statements from neighbors. The defense signaled potential claims of mental illness and battered woman syndrome to reduce Candace's culpability. Outside the courthouse, a throng of bystanders called for justice. Some held signs demanding life sentences. Others criticized Child Protective Services, asking why Gabby hadn't been removed earlier. The entire community seemed galvanized by a mix of grief and anger. As investigators finalized their case, chilling details emerged. Forensic examination. Chunks of Gabby's skin were found in the bathtub drain. Scalding water had caused it to slough off. Evidence showed the water temperature exceeded safe levels for a small child. Digital evidence, text messages, and call logs painted a picture of routine abuse. Jokes about punishments, casual talk about harming Gabby, and references to hiding bruises appeared repeatedly. Autopsy findings, older bruises, indicating repeated physical assaults over time. Potential bone fractures never medically addressed. Traces of amphetamine suggested forced drug ingestion. Witness accounts, neighbors, though hesitant, reported hearing screaming and banging. Some had seen Gabby with bruises or dirty clothing. Others recalled Candace or Brad making excuses about the child's absence. All these elements supported the prosecution's narrative of premeditated cruelty, culminating in Gabby's death. If the couple had simply been careless, the injuries might have presented differently. But forced immersion in scalding water for an extended period left no doubt of intent to harm. The trial date drew extensive media attention. True crime enthusiasts, local parenting groups, and social workers followed every update. Cable news channels sent correspondents to cover opening statements. The question on everyone's mind: would Candace, a once abused child herself, be held equally responsible for Gabby's death? Or would the court view her as a manipulated partner? Prosecutors argued that Candace was not merely a bystander, citing evidence that she sometimes took part in punishing Gabby. Defense attorneys tried to frame her as a victim of ongoing domestic violence, battered into compliance. Meanwhile, Brad's lawyer insisted he suffered from severe mental illness, including possible delusions and rage disorders. The state countered by highlighting Brad's attempt to flee, which implied he understood the criminality of his actions. Aunt Cynthia took the stand, her testimony one of the trial's most emotional moments. She recalled caring for Candace as a burned child, trying to protect Gabby, and the horror of finding her niece's daughter gravely injured on New Year's Day. Cynthia's sorrowful words underscored the generational tragedy. After days of graphic testimony and heart-wrenching evidence, the jury swiftly returned guilty verdicts for first-degree murder and child abuse. The judge sentenced both Candace Diaz and Brad Fields to life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole, reflecting the egregious nature of the crime. The courtroom remained solemn as the verdict was read, and even spectators who initially sympathized with Candace's background ultimately concluded that nothing justified her complicity in Gabby's prolonged abuse. In her final statement, Candace tearfully apologized, though many questioned the sincerity. Brad offered little more than a defiant glare. Gabby's extended family expressed relief that justice had been served, though no legal outcome could compensate for the loss of a 4-year-old girl, whose life ended in unimaginable pain. In the aftermath, public discourse turned to how such a case could happen. Many asked why neighbors didn't intervene sooner, or why Child Protective Services missed glaring red flags. Some pointed out that Candace's own childhood marked by severe burns, and legal intervention should have signaled a heightened risk for generational abuse. Local papers published editorials demanding reforms. Child advocacy groups proposed legislation, sometimes called Gabby's Law, calling for stricter protocols whenever a child is returned to a parent after extended guardianship by another relative. They argued for more frequent home checks, clearer guidelines for removing children from unsafe environments, and better mental health support for parents with histories of abuse. Candace's life trajectory from a toddler rescued from a fire to a mother facing murder charges shines a harsh light on the concept of intergenerational trauma. When caregivers fail, and the child welfare system doesn't adequately step in, individuals like Candace can carry unresolved psychological damage into adulthood. Under the wrong circumstances, especially with a violent partner, that damage can spawn new cycles of abuse, leaving children like Gabby to suffer the worst consequences. This perspective, however, neither excuses Candace's actions nor diminishes Brad's responsibility. The trial spotlighted how an adult's upbringing might shape their worldview, but it also underlined that each person ultimately chooses how they treat vulnerable children. Tragic though her past was, Candace had opportunities to seek help, leave Brad, or protect Gabby in the earlier stages of abuse. The court determined she failed on all counts. For Aunt Cynthia, life after the trial was marked by ongoing sorrow and guilt. She had once been proud of rescuing Candace from a life of neglect, yet she couldn't avert the cataclysmic fate that befell Gabby. In interviews, she recounted small memories, Gabby's first steps, her toothy grin, the sound of her playful giggle. Each recollection served as both a comfort and a reminder of the system's inadequacies. Cynthia also questioned her own choices, wondering if she could have fought harder for permanent custody or forced Candace into therapy. Psychologists remind us that all guardians, even loving ones, are constrained by legal frameworks. Once Candace, the biological mother, asserted her rights, Cynthia had limited recourse. Nonetheless, the burden of what if haunted her, as it does many extended family members who witness abuse. They lack the power to intervene effectively. Gabby's short, tragic life ultimately spurred widespread anger, sadness, and calls for social change. Although her name joined a grim list of children lost to abuse, local activists used her case to rally for better protective services. Seminars, training programs, and volunteer initiatives cropped up, aimed at identifying children at risk and assisting struggling families before violence escalates. Candace Diaz and Brad Field remain in prison, serving their life sentences. Though the story often focuses on their cruelty, some observers emphasize that multiple failures led to Gabby's death: personal, familial, and institutional. Candace's own mother and grandmother had once faced criminal charges for neglect. Yet the cycle continued when Candace grew up in a fractured environment. Society's safety nets failed to shield Gabby, just as they had failed Candace decades earlier. In the end, Gabby's memory stands as a stark reminder of how quickly abuse can escalate and how desperately children rely on adults to protect them. If there is any lesson in this tragedy, it's the urgent need for vigilance, early intervention, and unwavering accountability. No child should endure the torment Gabby did, and no adult scores, even if profoundly deep, can justify participating in or enabling the torture of an innocent life. Concluding thoughts. Spanning from Candace's own brush with death in a childhood fire to Gabby's final horrific moments in a scalding bathtub, this tale exposes the enduring damage wrought by generational trauma. It highlights the importance of breaking cycles before they harden into patterns that produce new victims. While Candace's story begins with heartbreak and ends in criminal conviction, the broader social implications remain unresolved. Even if agencies and neighbors had intervened sooner, the outcome might still have hinged on Candace's willingness to separate from Brad or face her own traumatic past. Yet Gabby deserved more from the adults around her, from neighbors, from relatives, from child welfare officials, and especially from the mother entrusted with her care. The dark legacy of Candace Diaz and Brad Fields underscores that safeguarding vulnerable children demands consistent vigilance, structured support, and, when necessary, decisive legal action. Without these safeguards, the harrowing fate of Gabby can too easily repeat itself, leaving behind another shattered family, another grieving community, and another unthinkable tragedy.